So those of you who are looking for mentorship, my name is Walden Wong. I'm a comic book artist for Marvel and DC Comics, and I have a Patreon page. That Patreon page is patreon.com/WaldenWongArt, and over there's different tiers of support. Among them is a few mentorship programs where you can sign up for it, and then when you do the homework assignment, or if you have some of your own work, you can send it to me, and I would do the reviews, and I would make videos like this so everyone can see and learn from them. So this video is one of my Patreons. His name is Milton Silva, and he sent me this image right over here. Okay, that's his inks, and the pencils is by Robson Roca. And let me show you original pencils right over here. So I'm gonna go over this and do critiques, and then show you how I would do things differently, how I would approach certain pencil lines, and how I render certain areas. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so this is the piece that I'm going to be doing the art review and critique today. It's a Batman piece. This was by one of my patrons. My patron, his name is Milton Silva. He subscribes to one of my mentorship programs over on my Patreon page, where artists will send me some of their inking work or penciling work or whatever work that they're interested in improving on. And I would look over the work, and I would critique it and do markups and critique it. So the pencils were by Robson Roca. Milton got the files from a page that he purchased from Robson, and then he inked on top of it. And every so often, I'll be toggling back and forth from the inks to the pencils so I can see what's underneath the inks. And I'll also be marking everything up in red. This way, when I'm done marking it up and I send the file back to my Patreon, he'll be able to see right away where the markups are. So I'm going to go in there and look at the first panel to see if there's any corrections or adjustments that we can do. So right away, I noticed the cracks over here. So when I'm inking cracks, a lot of times I'll try to ink those with straight lines like that. And then when I'm going into the cracks, this area is done pretty well. But there's a line right here. I'm going to go in closer so everyone can see. So that line here, I wouldn't have that line. I would erase that line. For example, if I was inking a crack, and then I did something like that, I would actually use like a white ink to ink that area like this. Or sometimes I'll just go in there and ink that line like this. And then instead of just continuing that line, I'll just use white ink, and I'll go in there and just finish that line like that. So when I'm doing white ink, I would go into the cracks and some of the details. And just to make some areas a little bit even nicer, some of these cracks I'll just add in a little bit in there like that. So there's a little bit of texture that you can see in between the cracks like that, just to make it a little bit more cooler. See? Now the next thing I notice is the chair over here. There's a really nice thick outline here, but since that outline is so thick, this outline back here should be somewhat the same thickness because that object is way in the foreground. Also, the armrest area. You see how this area is so thin over here? Okay, it's good that you have this line here with that good thickness and this line with good thickness, but I would be consistent. I will also make this line a little bit thicker there. Now we're going to look at some of the other areas. Okay, now I see there's a white line that my Patreon created. He's separating the artwork that's inside this panel from the outside black background. So sometimes let me explain. I'm going to go back and look. So sometimes when a penciler would draw something, they would just draw the panels and then just indicate the background would be all black. In this case, when the background is inked all black and there's a little bit of this panel over here that's also inked black, all of that is going to mesh together and you won't be able to see anything. When you're doing comics, sometimes it's okay. I would just talk to the penciler to see. Hey, I would tell them, some of that background is going to mesh. What would you like me to do? In cases like that, and where the penciler didn't notice, what I'll do is I'll add a double outline. So, for example, I would ink that line here with a straight edge, and then I would create another box on the outside. That way, when I'm done, I would have two. There'll be like a white border on that. So right here, there'll be a white border here and then a white border here. But if the penciler rather just have everything and let it bleed to the background, then I would just bleed to the background. But I wouldn't create a white outline a white halo there. Halo, let me explain what a halo is. So a halo is spelled H-A-L-O. Halo is a white line that separates two inked areas, and that the reason for that is to help separate two forms. For example, right here. Now, when we look at this character's shoulder, we do see there's a little bit of white outline right over here. Okay, see these white outlines over here? We know that it looks nice if it's separated. So what I would do is I would separate using a white halo that goes all the way across. I wouldn't do a section here and a section there and a section there. I would go all the way across, just like this. Okay. Yeah, I've learned to, when I work in comics, I like creating halo and then have that go all the way across. So let's take a look at some of the other areas to see if there's any other halo work. Yeah, same thing here. See that? That it's kind of distracting over here. Or I would just have that white line go all the way across and then create like a little thin black outline over there. Let me see if I can grab my brush. Grab my brush, get this brush. And then I'm going to add this white line and just go all the way there like that. Okay, and then I would leave that black outline. Okay, so instead of just separating like that, I would leave a little outline. So I'm gonna go in there and show you how I would do that. I'm just gonna grab some black ink, and right here I'm gonna draw this, and then draw that line like that. And then I'll use white and I'll draw that line like this. Okay, all the way across like that. Okay, and then the black line, we're just gonna go here, go all the way across. So now you have like a kind of like a white border over there, as opposed to these little notches of white that's going over there. Okay, yeah, let me create another one so everyone has a better idea. So right here, I'll use black. I'll draw that line all the way across, and then I'll skip a space, and I'll draw another black line across like this, and then I'll leave the insides white, kind of like that. Okay, so now you have almost like a mini gutter over there. That'll help separate it. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the other areas. Actually, let me mark this area first so my Patreon will remember what I've done. That area and then that area. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the other work here. Now, I look at these taper lines. Sometimes when I'm tapering lines, I like to have my lines nice, sharp, and tapered. So I'm going to go in there and taper some of these lines and show you how I approach tapering them. Now, when I'm tapering, I don't just tape going this way or going that way. I like to rotate my artwork. When I rotate my artwork, it's so my hand can draw that line better. Since I'm right-handed, my hand naturally goes from left to right. A lot of artists, pretty much with anyone, all their lives, they're used to learning how to write left to right. So when they draw, the lines are much easier drawn left to right. Let's take a look at the pencils. Now here's the pencils, and this is how I will ink this portion. So I would start thin, I would press into the black. I'll start thin very lightly, and I would press into it. Now as I'm pressing into it, I like those lines to get thicker, and it tapers to a nice thick to thin. I'm going to make my brush a little bit thicker. So I'll lightly press in, and I'll press harder as I go into the black area, just like this. Okay? Gotta do a few more. Now, another thing to consider is sometimes when a penciler is drawing all those lines, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to ink in every line. Just use those lines as an indication of what you're supposed to ink, and then go in there and put in nice taper lines. So here I'm going to go in here and taper, and then as I go further out where there's no solid black, I would just lighten up like this, and I'll get thinner and thinner like that. Okay, so let's take a look at the inks again, and let's see some of the other areas. So this area, this is what I call cross tapering, where there's a black ink going into a black area. So let's take a look at the pencils. So the pencil kind of indicated there's some cross hatching, but it tapers on the inside. So I'm going to show you how I would approach doing this. So again, I'll start thin, I'll press into it, I'll start thin, press into it. Now let's take a look at the pencils. So I'll just go like this, press into it and make it go thicker, like so. Okay, and I want those lines to close up into a nice pattern. Okay, I'll go in here, I'll close up those lines, and then I'll rotate my board, my Bristol board, or if you're doing this digitally, you can just rotate this using the rotation tool on your program that you're using. And then here, I'll just cross taper. I'll start thin, and I'll press down. I'll start thin, and I'll press down, just like this. Okay, there, 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 and then there. And you want to go back in there and just close up some of those. So these diamond shapes, what you're looking for is a pattern. Large shapes that get smaller and get smaller and get smaller. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the other areas that can be improved upon. I'll rotate it back into the right position. Now I see what my Patreon was trying to do here with the backgrounds. Let's take a look at how the pencils look. The pencils, it's like a fabric, like a curtain, and it's like a lot of solid blacks. Okay, so he used white ink and kind of broke them up, and that is actually a pretty good idea. It's not a bad idea. It's Halo, Halo. Okay, let me adjust this. So right here, when I'm doing solid blacks, let me show you how I would approach doing that. I would actually ink in, I would actually ink in everything as a solid black first, and then I would use a few white lines, and I would go in there, and I would cut into it instead of a lot of little specks, which makes it look like a dusty fabric. I would just go in there and just draw a few lines in there. Or, to be creative, even do some texture taper lines in there just to make it look a little bit nicer. So that's what I would do. Okay, I won't have all these kind of end just like that. Let me see how the pencils look. Okay, I would actually have it go all the way down. So let me grab some black color, have it go all the way down like this, just so it continues behind the object that back there. Okay, I'm gonna adjust this, grab red, mark it in red first, so we all know what areas that we worked on. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other areas. Yeah, I would practice working on some of the taper lines. So for example, these lines over here, what is the blunt? Try to practice going from very thin to thick. So right over here, we're going thin, and then kind of build up on it, go thin, and then build up, go thin, and then build up. Okay, now some of these areas, I like that there's a nice pattern going on here. So what I would do is I would make those patterns a little bit nicer. So kind of like this. Okay, so don't have that little bit extra like that. It creates a better form. Okay, same with here, same with here, same with these lines over here, same with these little lines. You want where the beginning of these lines start, you kind of want it to be following somewhat of a pattern. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the other areas. Let me grab my red pencil. Okay, and let's zoom back a little bit. Rotate it back into the right place. And let's take a look at the hand. The hand's in the foreground. Okay, now you see this knuckle here? This knuckle is, there's a really thick line here. But that knuckle is probably within this hand, is the middle ground of this hand. Now, closer to the knuckle is this area. This front finger should be a little bit thicker and this finger a little bit thinner. And in that case, I would make this line a little bit thicker and I would taper off to a small part. This way, this finger is in front. Just like these, this is done well. Right over here, that's done well. This is done well. But this line over here, where there was no line, there wasn't a line weight, if you make that a little bit thicker, it'll look nicer. And then here, just because the top shadow is a little bit thicker, I would actually make the bottom shadow thicker. A good rule of thumb is when there's a shadow, it's usually on the bottom. So I would make the bottom line weight a little bit thicker there. Okay, so we'll take another look. So see that? This one over here is done well, but this one could be a little bit thicker. Okay, I always feel okay to use templates. I use a lot of template work, so I will use a curve here and a curve there, and I will also use rulers to ink in some of these line works just to make it a little bit better. So when I'm using templates, not only am I using the templates to create these curves nicely, I'm also using those templates to be consistent with these little measuring measuring stuff. So over here, I would, whatever curve, whatever degree template I use here, I would continue using that template. I would bring it back and I would ink it. Now, if you're doing this digitally, you can kind of keep that same curve. As long as you have that rule of drawing a cylinder, for example, if this is your cylinder, like this, and this is your curve, here's the curve, we draw that curve, everything inside should be the same curve. Okay, so if you had a cylinder that was more of an oval like this, that's going this way, okay, this curve here and this curve here, everything inside should stay consistent, the same curve. You shouldn't be having a curve that goes this way or a curve that goes that way. You should be somewhat consistent. Same as if you had a cylinder going this direction, okay, this curve should be the same as this curve, should be the same as this curve and this curve. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other areas. Uh, Foreground, middle ground, background. So this ashtray, I would beef up that line a little bit thicker to pop that out in the foreground. Good job here. Well, this line is thicker. I would make this line a little bit thicker, but not thicker than this ashtray over here. Okay, let's take a look at this figure here. Same thing with these. Instead of just using white to break it in there, maybe use a white gel pen to draw lines, or you can also use FW acrylic paint. FW acrylic paint can use a brush for that, or white ink, and then kind of cut it in there. So some of these art supplies that I mentioned, I'll add links below my video description that goes to my art store, and you can purchase anything on those like those Amazon links, and then it'll be the same supplies that I use. So right here, we're gonna look at, okay, so some of these table lines are good, okay, but I would kind of go in there and um, soften up some of, like the consistency is, I see there's a little bit of whiteout, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with using whiteout to get that consistency. Over here, I would get a little bit of that consistency. I'm gonna go in there and kind of cover up that consistency, cover up that line there, and then try to taper your lines a little bit better. I'm gonna show you how I would taper it. Actually, the lines here are not that bad, but I would just close up those lines. So almost like a little triangle line there. Okay. So not only when you're inking, when you're doing taper lines, not only are you thinking about that thin line going into thick. Here we go. I'll just do a few thin line going into thick, thin going to thick. You're also looking at this negative space, that white line here. So let me grab black. Okay. So if I ink that taper line like this, like this, okay. Not only is that line starting from a thin area to a thick area, you're also creating the negative space. The negative space is this paper, which has a sharp tip here. This paper, you see a sharp tip? You want to keep that consistent as well. So consistency from where it starts, and consistency on where it ends, like that. Okay. Now let's take a look at some of the other areas that can be improved. Okay, spacing is also important when you're doing hatch lines or cross hatch lines. So when we look at this line, this taper line is a little bit thicker, and over here it's thinner, and all of a sudden the spacing over here is a little bit off. I would go in there, I would keep those lines spaced evenly, and if I need those lines, that taper line to get thicker, I would gradually go thicker. I don't want it. I don't want one to be that thick and then all of a sudden thinner and then thicker. I want it to be gradual. The more gradual you do your taper lines, the nicer it'll look. Now let's talk about line weights. So line weights on this hand right here, we have somewhat of a consistent line. Now, if you create line weights, it makes a flat artwork look 3D. So adding a little thickness here and here will make that line, the hand, so much better. Let's finish up that finger over there. Let me take another look. Let me look at the pencils. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of this. Now, if I was inking this hand right here, this is the pencils. I would go in there and I would, let's see if I can, let me erase some of these lines. Okay, I would go in there and beef up this bottom line. here, and then I would go thin, and then go thick. So here I would go thin, thin here, and thick here, thin here, and I will go thick over there. And again, I'm thinking about where the light source is. Light source, L-I-G-H, light source. And then the shadow areas, the bottom area is the areas that's usually a little bit thicker. Okay, so if I was inking the top of the finger right here, I would go thin, thick here. I would go in here and kind of go thin, and then kind of with that knuckle over here, I would just beef up that up a little bit, and then go like that. Okay, I know this breaks the rule of the light source, but to create this form, it just looks better. But for the most part, usually the bottom part of the object is usually a little bit thicker. So thinner, thicker here, and then go thinner there like that. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other areas. I'm going to move these back into the right place so it matches the pencils that my Patreon worked on. So right here. Okay, so let's take a look at nice job on these texture lines right here. Yeah, these are done nicely. These are little wobbly lines. Okay, this is kind of like a wobbly taper line. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so smoothness is another thing to work on. So some of these lines are a little bit bumpy in there. The best way to ink lines smoother is to go a little bit quicker. The quicker you ink a line, so I'm going to rotate this so we can go in there and I can demonstrate what I mean when I say quicker. When you're inking a line and you're going slow, even when I'm doing this digitally, there's a good chance that that line is a little bit wobbly. But if you go quicker, when you ink that line fast, you're going to get a smooth line. Now you're probably asking, okay, so Walden, how are you going to ink that line that goes up, down, smooth and quick? So what I would do, I was go in there and do partial line, and I would come back and I'll go in there and do a partial line, and I would come back and I'll do another partial line, just like that. So a lot of partial lines, okay? That way, you're doing it quickly. I'll do a ghost line. Ghost line means I'll practice doing that movement right over here. I'll do that movement to see if my hand can go into that right area. And now inking that line, I'll move my pencil board a little bit. I'll do another movement with my hand to see if I can make that gesture. And then I'll go in there, I'll ink that line quickly. That way you get a nice smooth line. So right here, do that practice movement, that ghost line, ink that line, practice that ghost line, ink that line. So what I'm inking, a lot of times I'm going practice my ink, practice ink, like that. Okay. Okay, we want to look at some of the other areas. Okay, so looking here, okay, this arm, okay, so we have that chair in the foreground. Okay, and then we have the shoulder in the middle ground, and then we have this leg in the background. So when I say foreground, middle ground, background, that doesn't just mean foreground of the person or middle ground of Batman and background of the building back there. You also need to think about foreground, middle ground of each item that you're working on. Okay, so we have this chair that has a really nice thick uh, outline there, which is good. Now this arm here is in the middle, and then in the back we have this torso here and this leg. See how thick this line is? You see how thick this line is? Now, because those lines are so thick, this muscle here needs to be a little bit thicker. Same with this, but not as thick as this line over there. Okay, this line will be the thickest, followed by this line, then this, then this. Okay, and again, okay, nice job on this chin with this nice thick line. But again, on this arm here, this line here is a little bit too thick. What I would do is I would beef up the bottom line. Again, we also think about where the light source is. And then again with the finger. Fingers are some of the funnest things to ink because there's so much different joints to it. You can play with the line weights a lot. I like inking fingers a lot. Okay, we're going to take a look at some of the other areas. So yeah, some of these, so here's a good example of nice taper lines. They start at a nice fine tip, and they're almost, see, I'm gonna erase some of these, erase some of this. That way, the beginning of the tips is a nice consistency, and then they close up into a sharp tip. So these are nice. Same with this. This is done pretty well too, this area. So they start sharp, they're starting all in a row, and they go in there and then they close up nicely. So I'm going to close up this one a little bit nicer over there. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other ones. Now, anytime I'm tapering lines, I always like to start as sharp as I can. So some of these, they're almost like blunts. I don't want blunts to be too sharp. I mean to be too flat. I like those tips to be as sharp as I can. So I would get in there. If I was using a quill, okay, it depends on what tools you're using. If I was using a quill, what I'll do is I'll flick out. I'll flick out and I'll get that line. Okay, but if I was using a brush, I would press in. I would push in to get that line. So either you're flicking out to get that thick to thin. So if you're flicking out, I would go from the inside, flicking out like this, okay, to get that line. Or if you're using a brush, what I like to do with a brush, I would push in. So I would go in very lightly and I'll push down, going very lightly, and you push down. Now, if you're a seasoned comic book artist or a professional, you should be able to get to the point where you're able to press down on those lines to get that thin to thick like this, and then you should be able to go thick and then lightly ease up on the pressure of your brush. So you're going thick to thin, thick to thin. You should be able to ink it regardless of what direction. But for me, I'm quicker going this way, going into it. Like here, thin to thick, thin to thick, thin to thick. Okay, but you should be able to get to a point where you can do thick to thin. It's all about controlling how much pressure you have when you're using your brush or your quill. Okay, same thing. Okay, let's rotate this back to the right side up. Okay, same thing with these white lines. Instead of just drawing lines, kind of give it some kind of texture. So some textures of, so this looks kind of like curtains here. So I would go in there and create some of the curtain texture like this. Just follow, kind of draw it in there. As an artist, you can just go in there and try to create that same texture to break up some of the blacks. Now, again over here. Now, if you're gonna halo something like this little white area, if you're gonna halo that, you may as well halo all the way. So here, I would halo that, and then make sure the tip of the ears are a little bit consistent with both sides. You want both sides ears to be the same height. Now, you don't really, I don't think this part really needs to have a halo because there's no black on this side. This area you might need it. Again, it depends if the penciler wanted this black to mesh into the background or not. Now, say if we wanted it to be separate, so I would go in there, I would use white. Now I'm going to go in there and fix the ear to get it to the same height. Okay, so right here, I would ink that line, and then I would create that halo to separate. Okay, to separate that foreground. Okay, now usually when I'm doing halos such as this, anytime I'm haloing something, I would halo the whole object, not just certain parts of the area. So I would go all the way here and halo everything. Now, a lot of times that's unnecessary and you don't really need to do that. So what I'll do is I'm going to go back a few steps and show you what I'll do. Instead of haloing the whole object, I will halo a partial object. So right in Batman's ears, okay, I would actually draw that ear a little bit higher, and then I would halo the inside. So instead of just stopping right there, what I would do is I would halo the inside and then have that line continue like this. Okay, now you're on the inside of the object instead of the outside of the object. That way you don't have to go in there and halo everything out there. Okay, it really depends on how much black areas that is inked in and how much black areas that's in the back. So it's a inker's choice depending on what they like to do and which direction they like to go. Okay, let's take a look at this. So again, like these fingers, it wasn't really necessary to have those halo lines because we also need to think about the colors. What is the colors going to do? What color are they going to add around this area? Are they going to paint the skin color? So these halos isn't really necessary. Now, if there was some black areas within the fingers, then that's necessary. Let's see what the penciler did. Did the penciler indicate that he wanted halo? Sometimes the pencil they want that halo there. Yeah. So right here, the penciler when it was just inked in, drawn in, there wasn't really any halo part that was needed. But I do understand as a aspiring comic book artist, especially if you want to learn how to ink, adding halo does make a difference where it helps pops things forward into the background. So that's a pretty nice touch. But at the same time, again, anytime you halo something, you have to halo all the way across. It's almost like you're drawing something and then the whole character has a little bit of a force field and you want to halo everything over there. I remember the first time I started haloing bits and pieces. I sent some of my submissions to currently he's the image publisher or president. His name was Jim Valentino. He worked on Shadowhawk. I sent him some of my samples. This is when I first started wanting to be a comic book inker. He was nice enough to send me a review and said, anytime you're haloing something, it's always good to halo the whole object. Don't just halo bits and pieces of it. Okay, and right here we're going to talk about hatch lines. These hatch lines right here. I'm going to rotate it so my hand works a little bit better. So when I'm doing hatch lines, I like to space them. Okay, let me grab a red. I like to space them evenly and consistently. Okay, so instead of some lines like this cluster over here, instead of a few lines that's further apart and all of a sudden just some that's closer and then some that's further apart, what I like to do, I would space them evenly. Let's take a look at how the pencils look. Okay, that's something that was created by my patron by himself. But if I were to do these, you know what? Let me go in there and ink this line. Okay, let me zoom out to see how that texture looks. Okay, so I'm gonna go in there and well, those are just hatch lines. So okay, I'm gonna rotate it here, rotate it where my hand can glide that line a little bit smoothly. And then when I'm inking these lines, I'll just go in there and space them evenly as I can. And then all I'm concentrating on is where that line starts and where that line ends. So we remove that. So you want consistency. So right here, space them evenly, and you kind of want them to start in the pattern and end in the pattern. Okay, you want them to almost look like a computer printer printed out those lines very softly and smoothly and sharp. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other areas. Okay, good. So most of the areas that needs to be practiced on is to have some of those lines a little bit more consistent. Again, so those are areas such as straight lines like this. You want them to be a little bit smoother. Okay, if you're going into black areas, like for example this area right here, we have some thin lines that's going to a black area. What I'll do is I'll start thin right over here. I'll start thin. Let me get a thinner line. I'll start thin. And then as I go in there, I'll push my quill or my brush harder, and then I'll make those lines a little bit thicker, and then I'll space them closer. Okay, same with this side. I'll just go thin, and then I'll taper it into there. So let's take a look at how those lines look. Like this, it'll start thin, like this, and it'll gradually get thicker and spaced evenly. I'll do a few lines over here. So thin, here, as they go thicker, they're starting to get closer to each other and thicker, like that. This is a nice gradation right over there. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the other areas. Oh no, some of this is good ink work. Most of the times when you're looking at the black inks areas like this, you're gonna get little spotches of gray and some of them that are dark. What I like to do is I will go back to there and I will spot everything in black ink just to make it a nice, rich black ink area. Okay, let's take a look at the hair. Okay, so the hair, same thing. It's all about the creating that with those nice taper lines. So I will go in there and I will just push into those lines. Okay, I will make sure all those lines are gradual and consistently flowing to each other. Okay, so like that. Okay, like this. Okay, so let me see any other areas that can be worked on that looks a little bit better and to improve. Okay, now some of these lines, here's something I noticed right away. Again, this is a little bit wobbly here. I would just go a little bit quicker. Again, rotate your Bristol board or rotate your canvas if you're doing it digitally, and then go in here and then just quickly ink that line as quick as you can. I do see that whiteout is used, and that's okay. A lot of times when you're inking, feel free to use as much whiteout as you can, because once the book is published, no one knows that there's no whiteout lines. So I'll just go in there and ink that line really quickly. Rotate it where the angle's kind of good. See if you can make that gesture, and then go in there and then ink that line. And also, when you're inking that line, try to create some kind of line weight. Okay, the line weight is just what's gonna make those lines really nice and like fluid looking like this. So practice going from thin to thick to thin, or vice versa, thin to thick to thin, and then thick to thin to thick. It's just controlling the pressure of your brush or controlling the pressure of your quill. Go in there and make those lines smooth as you can. I'll always turn it and I'll arc my hand and I'll make those lines nice and smooth. Okay, and then that's it for this video. I'm gonna save this image. I'm gonna rotate it back into the right place. I'm gonna save this, send the markups to my Patreon, and then upload this video. And any one of you who are interested in becoming one of my Patreon and have a mentorship, check my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/WaldenWongArt, and I also add links below this video description. So this is from Milton Silva. So there you have it. That's my art review and critique for one of the pages that my Patreon worked on. So if you're interested in a mentorship from me, check out my Patreon page. My Patreon is patreon.com/WaldenWongArt. I'll also add links below the video description so you can go there and check it out. There's also different tiers of support if you're interested in supporting this channel. Also check out my website. My website is waldenwongart.com. On my website, there's a blog, there's videos, there's links and news, and a lot of fun stuff about my work in comic books. So check that out. And if you enjoy these videos and like to see more of them, please think about subscribing to my channel. Please like, share, and anytime you comment, I'll always respond to your comment. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.